Hello, everyone. I'm Ross from Mythic Mountains Folk Tabletop Club. At Mythic Mountains, we play and discuss folk tabletop games. Tonight, I'm joined with Rod Hampton, the author of Dragons Beyond, Men in Metal, Midwest Fantasy War Games. Has a really cool Substack. I'll include all of this in the description, of course. But welcome, Rod.
It's nice to be here, Ross. Thanks for having me on. I was checking out the content on your channel, and it looks like you've got a lot out there, man. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you always been like a tabletop war gamer?
Yeah, I'll give you the quick thumbnail sketch, right? So I started playing serious games, these kind of crazy elf games starting back in 1981. In December of 81, I got the Moldvay basic boxed set and started playing with my junior high friends, and I became the forever DM. So we played through Expert, and then in high school, I was the first one to get the first edition DMG. And so, that took us up through 88, got into computer gaming, wargaming. Didn't really do much. After about 90, I got out of the Army. I played a handful of times when I was in the Army. Got out of the Army, went back to college, played a handful of times there, and then just life happened, right? So from 96, when I met the girl that eventually became my wife, from 96 until COVID, I did nothing.
Wow, you did the Stranger Things thing. You did it. You lived it. What did you do in the Army? What was your MOS?
Yeah, I was 11 Mike, so mechanized infantryman. I was direct enrolled in the EE program there, electrical engineering. Wasn't doing so great. Was in ROTC, already intended to go to the Army. Desert Shield started happening, and I went to the MEP station. I said, give me infantry or armor, and they were like, hey, how about infantry this Friday? And I said, sure, sign me up. They signed me up under a contract called 11 X-Ray, which meant needs of the Army. I was going to be an infantryman, but I didn't know if I was going to be a mortarman or a mechanized guy or a leg or what. And then
did you go to Fort Knox for that, or Fort Benning?
Fort Benning. It was one station unit training back in those days. So
do you remember your battalion?
Yeah, I do. Bravo 4th 36th Infantry. Deeds, not words.
Wow.
Yeah, you do not forget that
amazing
stuff.
I don't remember the motto. I was in Alpha 119 at Fort Benning.
Oh, no way. What years were you there?
I was at Fort Benning in 2003.
Oh, fantastic. So. Well, I hope it was just as miserable as it was supposed to be.
Yeah, it was pretty miserable.
Right? We did our little 3-day between basic and AIT, and came back, and the drill sergeants put us in formation that first morning, like, welcome to AIT, drop, and they started working us. So it's like, you had your little 3-day pass, but now it's back to big boy stuff.
My National Guard unit was supposed to be, what were those APCs called? M117s? M1...
So there were 113s. Yeah, there were 113s, and then there were Bradleys back in those days.
That's what it is, M113s, yeah. And but they I don't think they even ever PMCS those things, so they changed to a light infantry unit. But I got out of that before it mattered. But good times, and yeah. So this is like I kind of look at you guys as like the hope of the hobby, because like you came in like back when it was good, and then you've been gone, and now you're coming back.
Right.
So I know a lot of people like that. Yeah.
There wasn't time to get people around the tabletop.
Right.
COVID happened though, and I'd watched a couple of videos from Ben Milton and a couple other people about this old school Renaissance, old school revival stuff, and saw his videos on swords and wizardry and some of the other stuff, and decided I was going to do OSE. So I've got the hard covers back there, but I did the OSE advanced thing and found...
What year is that?
It was in 2019 to 2020, somewhere in there. I formed a group. I found people online, convinced them to let me DM, and we were going to do old school essentials. And I built everything in Foundry. I stood up an AWS, an EC2 server on AWS, and built my own Foundry and loaded everything around B2 into that thing. and figured out how to do Foundry, figured out how to be a DM again, and we did 73 sessions. 73
Wow.
sessions that campaign ran.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It kept our sanity. Every Wednesday night we were playing OSE, and we got through B2, the B2, the original B2 module from TSR. And then there was another location they went to where I had the Hackmaster B2 and the Hackmaster B1 modules with a little bit of B1 thrown in. And I also had an Underdark kind of thing that they could have gotten into. I over-prepped this thing, but it was meant to be able to take them up to advanced levels. But they topped out around 6th level, I think. We went into X2, and X2 was a very... It was getting close to a TPK when we wrapped it up.
I'm thankful, because what Questing Beast did is it's all just an algorithm thing. Like, it showed up. If it hadn't, I was going to just stop playing D&D. I was going to I don't think I like this game, because I had ran 5e. I tried it the first time in 2015, and I started running it pretty seriously in 2018 and 19 and 20. And then if I hadn't seen those videos, I was going to be like, all right, I don't think I like this anymore. And then I saw those, and one of his videos that blew my mind, I don't even know, like the very concept of this was so alien. He has a video where he takes Old School Essentials and he takes the procedures, mostly on the end pages of it, and he goes line by line. And he's like, okay, you come to a door. The door could be stuck or it could be locked. If you go through the door, it will automatically close except for monsters. And I was just like, I like even thinking about D&D in that way was so alien to me.
Right.
And at first I didn't, that was not what like drew me to that. But the idea of hygienically running a procedure was so bizarre. And I applied it to a dungeon, because up to that point, we had dungeons, but dungeons were just a series of encounters. Literally, it was just a matrix of encounters. That's all it was. There was no time. There were no random encounters. None of that was in the game. And so I added random encounters and time and light, and all of a sudden it worked. And I was like, whoa. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons until now. I didn't even know, And anyways, so that was a big threshold crossing for me and I'm very thankful for that channel. My hope, my goal, a technical one, and one that will persuade people. That's my goal. Is I think of the audience. Most people that watch this YouTube channel, they watch the Swords and Wizardry actual plays. That's like, so there are a few of those videos where like a bunch of people, they're mowing the yard or whatever, and they're Gen X men. And they're mowing the yard and they listen to people play Dungeons and Dragons. That's what, so my goal is, I guess one thing is not go through the pain I went through. That's one thing, like we're like, the next retroclone and the next retroclone and the next thing and this thing. But my hope is, there are kind of two sides to this. There's the classical gaming side and then like the old school Renaissance or like new school or whatever side of it. And original D&D is, to the new school people, it's an excuse to have a minimalist game. And that's fine. But what I want to try to say is, hey, actually, there's this entire game. Like there's all these things that are said to be completely vestigial. And in fact, that's actually the game itself. And like, how can we persuade people to say, actually that barony section and the random castle section, everything, this creates this living game that is so profound.
Yeah, it's designed to. It's absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's,
I think everyone reads it. Like, in fact, Questing Beast has the video on this. He's like, original D&D is so opaque, is what he says. Then the other side of it is the classical gamer, who my observation has been they've passed this by. And they either play Adventure Conqueror King or they play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons or a retroclone of that. If they're classical, if that's their goal, then they just pass this toolkit by and they leave it. And so how do we persuade people that, like, actually you could take this game seriously on its face and it's unique and special. So anyways, that's my hope. I want to talk about two things, actually, but I want to see if we can get to one at the end. So I'm just going to kind of tease it. I want to talk to you about OD&D, Original Dungeons and Dragons. I want to get all your thoughts on that because you've done a ton of archaeology and work on it, and you've made a game. And then maybe at the end we'll talk about what I'll call, maybe you have a different name for this, what I'll call proto D&D. Yep. And I'm excited to kind of to get into that and into your game. But what is this Zero Edition or Original Dungeons and Dragons? What is that?
Right. So I was thinking about this ahead of the show. The popular belief is that in 1974, maybe in January of 74, maybe in February, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson brought to the marketplace the world's first role-playing game that involved a medieval fantasy setting that was largely based on Tolkien. That's kind of the popular conception of it. The truth of the matter is that it was an expansion to a miniature war game that happened to have a fantasy element to it. That miniature war game dealt with mass combat in the medieval era largely, and OD&D is really just a setting for Chainmail. That's where my head is with it right now.
That's not how most people think of Dungeons and Dragons, I think. Like most people, including, I always kind of point to this, it's probably not fair to think of anything that happened in the past as, this is the point, but I usually point to this one in 1983 when Gary Gygax was interviewed by BBC. Like the Gary Gygax of 1983 probably didn't think of it that way either.
No.
So what is it about that this is like a supplement to a war game that makes that distinct? Is that to say that the original version of the game is just completely unplayable, or it can't be played unless you have the whole context of people playing a war game? And then I'm going to ask about war games, but like how does that compare to what we think of Dungeons and Dragons? Are those two completely different animals? Is that an elephant and a gazelle right there?
It's complicated, but let's just assume that OD&D, we're talking about 1974, right? We're at the conception of this baby, and it's the 3 little brown books, what we call the 3 LBBs. And then there's a set of reference sheets, but it's basically these 3 little brown books. And you can, with a little bit of puzzling things out, because they are logically separated, right? Book 1 is basically the player's handbook. Book 2 is basically the monster manual. And book 3 is the Dungeon Master's Guide, essentially. It's only 150 pages of material. The first booklet is only 32 pages long. A person that already has some kind of background in an RPG, like today, there are, hundreds of thousands of people that know how to play an RPG now. They could pick this up, sit down with it for an evening and go, okay, I understand how much of this gameplay is supposed to go. The only part that I don't really understand is that missing piece, the war game piece, Chainmail, right? It keeps referring back to this thing. I've never played a war game. I'm going to need some help, right? Because you can't just get there on your own, or at least you can't easily.
First of all, I like that. So that's one thing that I want to point out because I agree. I had heard it said from multiple places and bigger voices in the indie world, not just one, but I've heard this multiple times. Original D&D is too complicated or too alien. And when I took it and I just read it as just someone that plays Dungeons and Dragons, but it was 5th edition. That's the first version I've ever played. So coming from that, when I took that first book and I read it, I was like, this is comprehensible. It's got classes, it's got progression, it's got how to hit monsters and stuff. This is not incomprehensible. So that's one thing. But then I think the next thing is people would say, well, why would you do that? So you like Dungeons and Dragons now, or role-playing games or whatever. So we've moved beyond that, And I suppose one anecdote I would give, because I hope people haven't been like, oh, okay, it's a war game. This is all just, we're talking about wargaming now. Now, I've since come to like indie wargaming and classic wargaming. Now, listen, if I may, Rod.
Sure.
If to the audience, if you're listening and you're into Dungeons and Dragons or you're into role-playing games and you're like about to tune out because you're hearing war games, give me a second and let's talk. All right, let's talk about original D&D here, because we're not done yet with the role-playing game crowd. Here's my thing about war games. I got out of the Army in 2016. It was the year after I'd found a group to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I went through this change. Later, I found, by the way, this is sort of the effect Donald Featherstone and his friends went through. This is not uncommon. A war game was the last thing I ever wanted to see again. When I got out of the Army, I was like, I just finished a big core level war game about us losing Lithuania to the Russians. I was like, I just want to hear about dragons and silly nonsense. I don't ever want to hear this stuff again. That's how I felt. So I came to Dungeons and Dragons to escape, to have that Tolkien-esque healthy escape where I can, get a break from how awful the world is. So I get it, I think, if you're like, hey, I ain't into war games. Let me see if I can reframe that, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because this has blown my mind. And it sort of leads into what I think is a mindset shift where this has a lot to offer. Instead of thinking of a war game as like literally the slaughter on a battlefield alone, I think what I've come to see these games as is a conflict simulation, where it's a lot of dimensions actually, and it's fascinating. And so it is dragons and weird stuff, but it's also social intrigue and nobles and barons, and like there's all this. It's a living, breathing world, and if you look at it from the point of view of a conflict simulation, it provides the tools for this living, simulated world. So, okay, that's my hope is that the people are like, oh, okay, it's a war game, and they're about to nope out. Don't nope out yet, because I think that this provides the answers to Dungeons and Dragons for me that I didn't realize. Like I was having problems with D&D, and I found solutions here. I don't know what you think about that, Rod, but
we could even drop the term war game from the entire rest of the discussion and just call it a conflict simulation, because really it is. Chainmail is a way to resolve conflicts. Those conflicts happen to be, people trying to bash each other over the head with maces and swords and charging each other with horses and lances and exciting stuff like that. But it's really just a set of systems to resolve conflict, which D&D largely, if you come from the 5e world, there's a lot of murder hoboing going on in 5e, isn't there? In addition to
that's my pitch. My pitch is this is less about just slaughter. Actually, and this has tools that modern D&D doesn't have. It has how much gold a certain number of peasants will produce in a certain area, and if you secure that land, and it has some naturally interlocking systems on the front end that have you interacting with patrons, and then it leaves the back end open where the gameplay occurs. It's more than the tactical battle. That's my pitch in case you're like, why would I care about original D&D? But let me ask you that, Rod. What makes original Dungeons & Dragons in practice distinct? How can we communicate this difference, this mindset shift?
Power level. So over time, D&D in particular, Gygax, I'll put some of the blame on him. Things got nerfed over time. If you look at what a hero, a fourth level fighting man, a fourth level fighter, right? Fourth level fighter, an eighth level fighter, a wizard starting at the level of seer, which is third level and up, what they can do on the battlefield in Chainmail, it'll blow your mind the first time you realize just how powerful those individual PCs and NPCs can be. Combine that with the fact that the spells that are in those 3 little brown books, and some of the stuff that you get later with gods, demigods, and heroes for the clerics as well. It's amazing. Like the Charm Person spell, that's a real bellwether too. There's no limit, right? You cast Charm Person, that person fails the save versus spells. That person is under the wizard's control. Period. There's no additional saves. There's nothing to get them out of it until some other person with magic comes along and rescues them from that situation, or that person that's in that situation bargains themselves out of that position. So the magic, let me just back the terrain up a minute. What makes OD&D great is the fact that the magic is rare, powerful, and imaginative, right? You have to fill in some of the pieces. You don't get walls of text to describe what a spell does. Usually it's like 4 or 5 sentences, paragraph tops, that tells you how a spell operates, and you and the people around your table and the DM are going to determine what the exact parameters of that are in the situation. So magic is rare and powerful. Magic swords, it'll blow your mind too, right? Every sword in OD&D has its own intelligence and ego, right? You've just added another NPC to the party when you pick up a magic sword. And it might have different ideas about what it wants to accomplish than the player that picked it up. That alone builds in conflict too. And then thirdly, it is that other element, right? The patron play, which some of this got lost along the way, but the patron play is designed to be there. PCs, like people in the same city, in different groups of PCs, the higher level guys are meant to be interacting with the lower level guys from the other groups, right? The whole thing is designed to work with up to 50 people and multiple refs. It's got a lot of load-bearing rules built into it that can allow that kind of wide imaginative play in a shared world. And I'll pause there if I'm way off track from where you're wanting to go.
Let me put the question back on the table. Like, we're talking to folks that like Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe they like old school Dungeons and Dragons or both. Why would they play original Dungeons and Dragons? So let me kind of point to 3 roads. As you said, we'll start at 1974. I came from the modern game. It was this huge threshold crossing moment just to come into old school Dungeons and Dragons. When I did that, it was revelatory and essentially it kept me playing. The sense of freedom and the sense of you have this total agency that's built on, you might say, not just lethality, but that it's consequential. So choices will matter. So if you've died, it's because you've made a choice, put yourself in a position, and there really are consequences. And so the outcome, I always say lethality is agency. And this is sort of like the topsy-turvy thing that people don't understand. How do you define agency? And I think people think of agency as I have control of the outcome. And then when you take that approach, in the end, you actually don't feel like you've had any control over anything. You were just given something. And when you take it the opposite approach and you look at it as I can choose anything within the context of something that can have consequences, it is, wow. I'm like, wow, I feel first, and it's so immersive. Okay, I'm just kind of glazing old school Dungeons and Dragons right now. I know a lot of people, if they listen to this, they can relate to at least that moment of threshold crossing. You make that crossing like I did, and you have all these titles. First of all, you could play the original. I had one person offer that. They used it from the basic set, from the Moldvay basic set from 1981. It was an amazing game. I enjoyed it immensely. Old School Essentials is not really different, in my opinion. It's mostly the same. There are a few things that are different. I don't know why. but I decided I wanted to try Swords and Wizardry. So I think when most people look into original Dungeons and Dragons, they're going to find these different roads to go down. And Swords and Wizardry is maybe the big name. If you compare the two, like Old School Essentials or Shadow Dark or whatever, all that stuff is very similar to Swords and Wizardry. What you're going to find is a little bit of a hint toward the original, which is that BX will have answers for things. It'll have answers for Charm Person. It'll have a time limit. Swords and Wizardry will just say, they're charmed, they're under your control, and it won't explain it at all.
Right.
And you'll have all of these things. What that has done, so I just want to point this out, that one pathway, or I'd say most people that say they want original Dungeons and Dragons, is you have an entire school of the OSR that found in original D&D a lack of rules. And that's so Iron Falcon, Swords and Wizardry, White Box Cyclopedia. You've got Into the Odd. People don't know this, but that was actually Chris McDowell's effort to create a original D&D for the people. You end up with, if you thought old school D&D was minimal enough, this is even more minimal. You could go down that design path. So that's one thing, is so people would say, hey, I really want extreme minimalism. But what they throw out of original D&D is, in my opinion, the game. Like basically all of the other components, which are mostly those world-facing elements. I haven't talked to many people that use the random castle rule in the context of like a wilderness sandbox, you know. Usually when people talk about running Swords and Wizardry online, I don't hear them mention that. And there's an entire section on domain. I almost hear overwhelmingly people that seem to like Swords and Wizardry or versions of original D&D will say, yeah, some people are into that, but most people don't. And it sort of ends there. But let's take a step further and say, well, all right, if original D&D has all these components that wasn't emphasized later in the Mincer set, why would we want any of those things? This isn't in Mincer and all of them. Like, why should I care about my wizard tower? I'm never going to see it. And if I do get it, what's it do? Like, why do I even care at that point? Why did you care? Like, why did you make that big step into, yeah.
Oh man. I was talking with you before we started recording the campaign that I did during COVID with my OSE players. We did not get into domain level play, but we went through the original B2. That was the first adventure that we went on, was to go to the keep on the Borderlands. And when I was looking at that, there is a section there on the catapults and the ballistae, and there's oil in a couple specific places, and they're very specific about, you know, what everybody's equipped with. If you look at the orientation of those heavy weapons on the edge of the keep, there's actually a gap up to the northeast, and I wrote it down, and I keep going back to toward the northeast, toward the forest. There's a gap in the defenses, and I kept going back to this. I'm like, what was Gary thinking, right?
Yeah.
Why did he do that? Why is all this material about the ranges and why is this open? What was the original design intent of Keep on the Borderlands? And it started to drive me nuts. And so I was like, okay, I read about chainmail when I was a kid. I got to figure out what the hell chainmail says. So I'm sorry, I'm going to swear occasionally on your show, I guess. I'll try to avoid the F-bomb. But, I'm like, what? I got to go back and read this. So I got a copy of Chainmail. This was around 2021 when I got a copy of Chainmail, and started to try and figure out how to play it by myself. And I set up a foundry. I set up a couple units, and I took elements of that keep specifically the hobgoblins, they're basically the heaviest force that's in the chaos, the caves of chaos. And I squared them off against some of the medium horsemen and the crossbowmen, and I brought the goblins out as archers and stuff like that. And I started playing with it. First of all, adjudicating it using what we call the alternative combat system in OD&D, but what everybody else just calls, the standard D20 to hit rolls. And it took forever to resolve that kind of stuff. But when I tried to resolve it with Chainmail, it was snappy, right? I could get to a result very quickly. And then I started to understand, right, what Gary was... He set up large factions within the Caves of the Chaos that were sometimes in conflict with each other. And there were even potentially factions inside the keep, right? You got that evil cleric. Who's he aligned with? Who knows? Maybe he's aligned with the clerics in Cave K. Another thing that was fascinating was in B2, if you look at that map, there are I think it's like a dozen different chimneys, and you can see them on the map. If you're reading the description very carefully, you can determine where those chimneys are, and then look at the map, and it's like, sure enough, there are places there. So he was already, like my players, they needed to get in to one of the caves. They found a potion of gaseous, gaseous form, had their elf turn into that. He arrived in the cave, stark naked, but was able to knock out one of the goblins, take its weapon, and then rescue a couple of people that had been snatched by the goblins, right? So now you've got this 3D element. All this stuff is like starting to get my brain firing. It's like, man, there are factions, and what if the Caves of Chaos was meant to like besiege the keep, and maybe they've got spies inside the keep and things like that. And I started to think, what would it be like if they got a white inside the keep, right into the lower bailey or the upper bailey? What kind of chaos would that cause? So my brain was just firing on all cylinders, just thinking about B2 constantly for a couple of months while we were playing sessions in there, and also learning Chainmail on the side. Sorry if I went off on a real tangent here, but yeah.
So okay, so yeah, it's archaeology. You're digging into why some of the design, and this is uniquely, in my opinion, because we played, for example, B3. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to put everything in buckets. That's not my goal, to say, oh, well, it's this, what she designed was completely different or something. I understand, but it is a very Gygaxian thing to say, all right, well, this keep has to have this because it's designed this way. Like, even at the end of his life, I've been looking at, I can't remember what they called it now, the new mega dungeon, but he was trying to put it back together kind of toward the end. It has that Gygaxian realism or naturalism, I've heard it called.
Is that Zigzag? It starts with, it's like
Zagig. Castle
Zagig. That's
Zagig.
it. Yeah,
so I was actually preparing that. And if you look at the castle, it's just like what you're saying. Like all here. So here, this guy's at the end, and despite his changes in his thinking and how like he was on board with role-playing games, like that he made that shift just like the industry made that shift. But he never lost his love of realism. Okay, so like you're finding this, where does it go from there? Like, how do you go from there to saying someone needs to make a clone of a proto-D, like which we'll talk about in a minute. Like, I'm excited to get into that. But like, how did you get that far in the archaeology where you're like, something's missing here?
You see these evolutionary things, and I was very familiar with first edition too. So once I started to read Chainmail, I'm like, oh, all the lights went on. I'm like, all those mercenary troop types that are in the first edition DMG, now that starts to make sense to me. It's like, oh, okay, now I understand why these different troops matter. Whereas the first edition DMG does not explain that at all. Why does morale matter? Why does loyalty and morale, what's the relationship between those things? What's this naval combat section? What's this aerial combat section, right? This stuff, it's buried in 1E and the DMG in particular. But there's no explanation, right? You've got different humanoid abilities to like excavate material, right? Soft ground and rock and stuff like that. But why would you do that? But if you read Chainmail and it's like, oh yeah, we're going to dig a mine or a counter mine. We need to know the rate at which these dudes can dig.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
He's building on top of Chainmail, even though he never says, hey, this is where this plugs in. He never makes that connection. And I can understand why. I mean, if you look at the volume of material they're producing in those heady days of TSR, there was so much that probably got lost just simply because they didn't have time. It just was not physically possible for them to produce that much volume of material and have it all connect back together.
Yes. And the business itself changed in character at one point where they essentially produced a certain type of product and then they got locked down and they stopped playing and they started becoming a business. All right, let me skip ahead actually to this. Let me read this. Beyond this point be dragons is, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this and skip around. Beyond this point be dragons is probably what the 1973 playtest version of the original fantasy role-playing game was called. There's only 2 copies that, as far as we know, existed, one of them from M.A.R. Barker. So we have these 2 things. There's also what eventually gets revealed later is the original fantasy role-playing game under the Judges Guild by Dave Arneson. I constantly point to that, where there's all these sort of, it's hard to explain. There are fewer rules in the first fantasy role-playing game to resolve character tasks than there are narratives on how the game flows or goes. And then there are sections that are technical, that seem extremely technical, as if they're very interested in the wind effect on a bombard or something. And like these 2 things seem so disparate, and also don't answer what any person that is into role-playing game design as we think of it would actually talk about. So we have these 2 different things, Beyond This Point Be Dragons and the first fantasy role-playing game. This is your forward. My purpose in editing Dragons Beyond is to resurrect a rule set that played quite differently than the original game that shipped in the wood grain boxes. And I believe it says here, this to me is profoundly important. This represents a form of play that no longer exists today. Like there was a moment where literally this entire form of play was utterly lost. And when did you write this? This was...
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of the timeline, right? So Yeah. Beyond This Point Be Dragons, which is the original, which is one of the playtest rules, right? So I want to clarify that. This was produced in 1973. Mark Buffkin, we believe, is the person that documented this. He's passed away. There were 2 copies of this that were both kind of found. One was called the DeLune manuscript. That's what John Peterson, a D&D historian, called it. And then D.H. Boggs was calling it Beyond This Point Be Dragons because ultimately there's a page at the front that says that, right? Those 2 copies of the same playtest materials may have been slightly altered, but it definitely came from the Twin Cities. So much of the material was in the original D&D that got published in 74 that it was pretty certain that this had a significant amount of playtest stuff that was being used up in the Twin Cities area where Arneson and his Blackmore bunch were. Now, fast forward to 2023, I was playing with these rules with some guys. I got exuberant about the fact that we were having a lot of fun with it, and I decided to write a retro clone based on it and fill it out completely. I published that in December of 2023. 2023 because I wanted to get it out there in advance of the 50-year anniversary of OD&D, which was in January of 2024. And then in February 2024, however, that's when this other 1973 draft from the Arneson v. Gygax lawsuit turns up. And there are differences between that version, which I'm going to call Arneson v. Gygax. There are differences between that 73 draft and Beyond This Point Be Dragons. But I didn't know that when I published Dragons Beyond. So it gets a little fuzzy. There was also these things called the Mornard fragments, but I think those were part of the Arneson v. Gygax lawsuit materials. So it seems like we've got two different and very closely related drafts of D&D that you could tell there was experimentation going on. Sorry if I've gotten a little overly complicated here.
But okay, so actually that's kind of one of the points. So there's games archaeology. Yeah. So some people enjoy this for that. Either a nostalgia or whatever that word is for people that like they weren't alive and they have that feeling of nostalgia anyway. Or they're just like they have like almost like a scientific interest, like an archaeology. They want to do it, and I think a lot of people in the OSR, even if they play the late form of OSR, they're playing Knave or Shattered Ark or whatever, they'll still want to go back and try what you did. Which they want to do what you did, which is they plop down and they solo play a thing of Chainmail because they want to understand. Mm-hmm. And I one thing I don't know how you feel about this, but first of all, I'm sort of, I'm still learning about wargaming after the fact, and I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying it. I don't know. Chainmail just didn't feel that complicated. It didn't feel that like it's got the charts in the back and you can resolve unit versus unit, and it just doesn't seem. If anything, I was almost like, man, can we just do this instead? This is way less complicated. So I would encourage anyone that's just loves it just for the archaeology. They just want to find it's very accessible, in my opinion, to take Chainmail 3rd edition from the website. And just use it. It's not bad. Okay. What I want to propose is why would we want to do this now? So we have this entire milieu that is lost. And there's an area where I think I want to kind of go into this difference in what I've come to call conventional play or traditional play, like how most people think about role-playing games, versus I've heard it called clubhouse play, but I don't think you have to have a clubhouse. I think you can this proto Dungeons and Dragons play. The anecdotes I would point to, like moving away from Gary Gygax and et cetera, is I would point to what like Tony Bath and Donald Featherstone were doing. Tony Bath created a living world.
It was actually Robert E. Howard stuff, right? He did the
Hyboria, yeah.
Yeah, he did a Hyboria campaign, and Phil Barker, who was I won't go off on this tangent too, but Barker played Conan in that thing, did some very deceptive stuff, and won the entire campaign. I can't recall if Featherstone was involved in that campaign or not, but definitely the same crowd of British wargamers that surrounded Tony Bath.
Do you remember what he did? Because that's what I want to go to. I want to reveal, what does this look like? I want to blow people's minds. So I have some examples, but
okay, so this gets back into the other two things, right? People think wargamers we're going to move these units, we're going to measure this stuff, and we're going to shoot this stuff.
It could be.
It could, yeah, absolutely. So and I'm hoping that Dominic Martin, I think is his name. He's doing a Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah.
Who's doing Critical Dawn.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So, because I kind of turned him on to a couple of things, but one thing that I've got so many projects, man. I can't get them all, but I dove into some of the diplomacy zines. So a lot of the names that are involved in early TSR history, including TSR over in UK, were involved in this Diplomacy Underground. Diplomacy is a game that was produced by Avalon Hill that specifically is about player versus player and the metagame, right? The negotiations that players do against each other. So we're going to gang up. We're going to gang up to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And it's the same thing you see now that's so fascinating when you get like Survivor, the TV show Survivor or the Traders or things like that.
That's a good point,
right?
Actually. That's a good point about Survivor, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it's hidden. It's a game of hidden information and betrayal, right? Avalon Hill didn't know that was the lightning they were putting in the bottle. And what diplomacy built was the substrata that D&D was able to leap forward on top of. There were all these zines that were produced, all these diplomacy variants, all these mailing lists and phone numbers, these call trees, where people were started to communicate across the country. And the other thing that happened at the same time was Ace produced the unauthorized, quote unquote, the loophole version of Lord of the Rings that came in the 60s to America too. So you've got this Tolkien fever, and you see it in the diplomacy zines. There's always a Middle-earth variant. There's always a Middle-earth variant. Multiple Middle-earth variants. And then you've got Tony Bath over there doing Robert E. Howard stuff.
Actually, let's go back to modern D&D. So most people that listen to this, and this is where we're here. Now, I'm not saying Rod say this, but we're here. You're doing D&D wrong. All of you.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, it's lost. They didn't know they were doing it wrong.
No, I was, listen, so conventional play, I'm going to just take this part head on, because even in OSR games, I enjoyed this, and I did it, and I still, it's still a tool. We still do this session-based play, but here, this is an example. This actually happened. So I went into my local game store, but I'm gonna bring some of this fire from the gods I'm finding here online with all these really cool players. I'm gonna bring it to the game store. I think I was offering Dungeon Crawl Classics or something like that, like not that hard to get into. I offered it to the owner's wife who was there at the time, and she said, "Oh, I would love to do that, but I can't play role-playing games." And I said, "Well, why can't you play role-playing games?" And she said, "Well, I don't have 4 hours." And I was like, "Well, what is," and I kind of like kept pulling on this thread. And then she was like, "And I don't have once a week on the same night every single week. I have an inconsistent schedule. My schedule changes. I have to be here to operate the store. I've got this other job I do." Okay. And then also, I don't know anybody. I have to, you have to have these exact 5 people, and it can only be those 5 people, and you got to be able to trust them and like have this level of trust as if you were going to have them watch your kids or go on a cross-country car ride, like this level of trust out the gate. And that's very hard to do, to build this level of trust is so hard. And I could go on, but I'm basically describing conventional play.
Right.
I'm describing how most people think that Dungeons and Dragons needs to go. The consequences I've seen of this, very few people can play. This is an elite sport or an elite niche thing. As much as people talk about including people, it's as exclusive as you could possibly be. Most normal people can't do this. It's incredibly complicated. It's not very human. It's not very like how people get together to do fun things together. Like it's very much like a human resources kind of like, it's like what you would do at work or something. Okay, so I've attacked conventional play. And then you have, I can't remember the author's name, but he does these complex sim type wargame things. And he's got a friend who's an oil worker. And the world is just going. The time is passing one for one on a calendar as if it's a real place. It's got characters. Everybody's owning these elements of the world. I don't even know how to express this mindset shift or how different this is. But his friend can't play. It's like an old rig worker. I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. So maybe it was Tony Bath. I can't remember. It was like, okay, well, tell us what you want your guy to do while you're gone, and we'll have so-and-so run it. And then he sends him a letter one time while he's on the rig, and then gets one update, comes back, says, "Hey, I'm sorry your guy's dead. Here's another thing." And then like I know that sounds bad to like a role play, like an RPGer, but if you don't want that, you have the fulfillment of literally anybody can do this. You could do it on any schedule. You could do it at any time. If it's a busy soccer dad, he can do it. If it's somebody who's a no-lifer, they can do it, and everybody can do it and be on the same plane. But what if D&D were like that? What if it were something that anybody could do, just like how you can go into a club or a tabletop game store or any kind of store, and you can play any other game. Like you can go in and they can just set up Twilight Imperium and you can just play. And if you can only play a little bit, it's not a huge deal. There are not all of these orthodoxies and strictures on how you can play. I'm trying to sell this thing, but it's hard to sell because there's an entire mindset shift to get there.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to.
It is. It's a mindset shift. So let's add the other spicy sauce, right? That happens up there in the Twin Cities. You got Dave Wesley over there, Army guy. Hua goes into the archives, finds that there's this Army war game that is a Kriegspiel variant produced by Charles A. Totten, right? And there's like there's one page in the second volume of this thing, and this is dense material. I've been all up and down the Strategos stuff. It's fascinating, but there's one page where it says, "Hey, once you understand how to play this game, you can create a riot scenario. You can do any number of things with these rules." And then the other perspective on it too is like, there's always a chance, the advisability of doing, there's always a chance that what you're trying to do will come off in some way, shape, or form. There's always a chance of failure and there's always a chance of success. He bakes that into the rules and says basically the advisability of making the attempt is up to the player. The referee is going to make sure that the odds are calculated correctly, but there's always going to be basically a 1 in 12 chance that something's going to go their way. So why not try, right? So, but where Wesley sits here is in the 1970s. And so he's also aware that the original Kriegspiel in Prussia was very constrained and the referees got tired of doing that BS. And they went to a more FKS kind of system, free Kriegspiel kind of system, where umpires with a great deal of military experience would just substitute their judgment for what the rule book was trying to encapsulate. And Wesley takes it one step even further. And he says, okay, well, my guys like to play Napoleonic war games and stuff. I'm going to tell them we're going to have a Napoleonic war game, but what we're really going to do is going to be some individual role play. He doesn't have a word for it. He comes up with the name for the city, and he calls the thing Braunstein, right? And I'll put the TM here, trademark, Dave Wesley and Associates.
Like we did that stuff in the Army all the time, right? Because I don't think the Army knows. I don't think the Army doesn't know how not to do this. Like they figured it out from the Germans that a long time ago that you do rehearsals and you set things up. And so you would do a rehearsal even if it were like a ball, let's try out, hey, Private Schmo, stand here. You're going to pretend to be General Schmuck and we're going to do a receiving line because we're going to actually put this from brain to hand instead of never having seen it before by the time General Schmuck gets here. And so like you would do this you wouldn't just do this for a squad assault. Like I'm trying to pitch this too, that wargaming is not just tactical units with weapons. Yeah. Well, so like if you take this brain and you're like, hey, we're just going to do serious games. We're going to I want to have this scenario. And he had this interesting scenario. And then he had another one, the Benania one. He had scenarios he wanted to do. Yeah,
and there were 2 or 3 others that have been lost to time. But he had, I think 5 or 6 maybe in total. But Benania is well known, and it looks like it'd be a heck of a lot of fun to play. And the same thing with I'm not sure that the original Braunstein is as fun to play, especially if they're, because it kind of relies on a few things that are clunky. The students being able to get themselves out of jail and stuff like that. Haven't played in it. I know people that have played in Dave Wesley's Braunstein, and came back with some ideas and thoughts about it. And I wrote one as well, like a space
I saw
scene.
that.
I played in a couple.
I'm very excited to try that, actually.
Yeah,
good.
it's fun. Mine's more turn-based. But the idea that Wesley brought was, okay, Totten has charts out the yin-yang. He's got tons of rules, lots of math, being able to calculate ratios on whether or not this cavalry charge can come off. And yet Totten has this page where he's like, forget all that stuff. It just comes down to there's always a chance of success, and you can model anything with the same principles. Once you've internalized the principles, that there's some kind of math that has to be involved, some kind of chances of success or failure, and degrees of success or failure, right? And you've got a referee that's going to adjudicate that, and there's going to be fog of war and uncertainty between the players. And Wesley adds into this, by the way, we're going to make the players not unit commanders, but in some cases they're individual participants, like the mayor of the city, a spy for the French, students to get in a fight, students to get in a fight about the politics, and people loved it, and he thought it was a failure, right? Is what the legend tells us, right? Wesley thought it was a failure, but everybody loved it, so, and he's been running it ever since. So the thing that piece of the puzzle. So again, we've got hidden information, human conflict. Anybody can do this. Anybody can do this. Right. You give somebody a half-page scenario and say, there's situation, here's who you are, here are your goals, here are the things that you don't want to happen, here's what you do want to have happen. Go to it, right? Interact with the fellow players, and here's a couple of dice rolls that you can do to adjudicate things when you get in a conflict. That's as hard as it has to be to do role-playing, right?
Well, and I think that's almost like the opposite of how people think of role-playing or role-playing games and role-playing game design. And I guess this is my pitch. My pitch for original Dungeons & Dragons for people is a completely different view of role-playing game design, which is that after original Dungeons & Dragons, and as it developed through supplements and things, it's what I call the difference between character-facing design and world-facing design. And the character-facing design is, all right, we need to figure out what button you can press on the character sheet. We need to balance the fighter. We need to balance the magic user, the blah, 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 blah. And this becomes the never-ending goal of role-playing game design, and it's never been figured out. And the opposite of that is what you just said, were essentially how you described Strategos, which is that you have 12 pages. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was 4 pages. I remember looking at Strategos and I was like, that's a lot of pages to describe the effects of heals and elevation and the change in relief on the movement of the cavalry versus an infantry unit. Mm-hmm. But that is how the world works. And then when the ability to actually say, take that hill, guess what? You don't need a character sheet for that anymore. Now, that's maybe a little too extreme, but I'm just saying that original Dungeons & Dragons is more on this end of design, this world-facing design, where it provides all kinds of solutions if you do it in the context of a living world where there are baronies and there are factions and patrons and competing elements, and they're on a map board, and you're looking down at this this map overland. And these things are in opposition to one another and dynamic. And if you think of it that way, then original Dungeons & Dragons has all kinds of interlocking math and tools to make that happen. The decisions to do things, that stuff takes care of itself. And that's my pitch for original Dungeons & Dragons. I ran Caverns of Thracia, and we used Chainmail, which was a blast. And I did use Swords and Wizardry, but I used the 3-level brown books as authoritative. But for the character sheet portion, people had gotten used to Swords and Wizardry, which is fine. It's not that different. And Caverns of Thracia, here's huge differences. Number one, they had made 4th or 5th level within, 2 or 3 months of play. It's just like that. Like, because they made moves. Like, they looked at the situation and they made schemes. And when they went into the dungeon, there was in Thracia, there's this, but in Thracia, there's a cult of like death or something, and then there's like undead, and then there's like above ground there's these monsters, and they got in with the cult, and they like, because they had made this shift of mindset, they looked at it like this board that they were strategizing at as a whole, and they pulled off this whole heist from the cult, and they pit the cult against an enemy group, a different faction. They end up in a fight. I used Chainmail to resolve that. They're traveling to overland, and I'd come up with a random castle, which had a wizard. And then, of course, a wizard can, like I do that by the book, it says that they can set you on a, what is it? They can do Gaius.
Yeah,
like
Gaish,
if the encounter.
quest. Yeah.
Gaish, yeah. And he was chaotic, and so he puts this curse on them. And the thing is, by just like doing those rules, I didn't pen and ink any of this out. I didn't prepare all. I think I'm going to put over here, I'm going to put a chaotic chaos wizard's tower. I didn't prepare any of that. Like I just had the map and the board and the procedures, and this whole thing came out. And what it was, I talked way less. And it was them coming up with schemes and designs and like trying to pit factions against each other and all this kind of stuff. It was just like the best D&D. Up to that point, it was as good as I could have ever seen it. And we did Old School Essentials for a 14-month campaign, and it did not produce that. So that's my I don't know. That's one example I can give. People will say, well, you can have factions, and that's true. That's true. But like the difference, the point is that the entire system is about providing all of these components in the world, as opposed to trying to provide the components for your character sheet.
Yeah, factions are absolutely essential. And I don't want to recap the OSE campaign I ran during COVID, but the players got into a significant amount of conflict with the bailiff and his 5 men. And another piece of it was they had actually captured one of the 2 goblin chieftains and charmed him. And they also had one. Yeah, there was a lot going on in that B2 campaign that was a lot of fun. But because they had insight into, once they got that goblin chieftain, they had insight into the kind of the politics that was going on over in the Caves of Chaos area. Meanwhile, at the keep on the Borderlands, things. One session they came back from the dungeon and found out the entire leadership had been flip-flopped. Right, there was a Witchfinder General character, kind of like Vincent Price, came in because he heard about the witchcraft that was going on in Cave K, and so the Duke, far off, had sent one of his Royal Inquisitors down to check out this witchcraft situation at the keep on the Borderlands, and he didn't like the answers Castellan had to say.
What made you decide to do that?
So, the entire duchy, my characters still don't know this. So, spoiler alert, characters, if any of my players are listening to this craziness, there was a Hamlet scenario that was actually playing out in the capital, where the king had been killed, his wife had married the brother, and there were all these things that were happening, and they saw military moves, and they got hints of what was going on, but they're out in the borderland, right? They don't know what the hell was going on in the capital. But the capital heard about this witchcraft situation, and that was a major problem back in the day, was situation with the undead. And they got a hint of that during session 1. So when the Inquisitor showed up, and I rolled up the character and stuff, it's like, and I had just watched Witchfinder General, I made the character basically Vincent Price from that movie. And one of my players was a big Hammer horror fan and was like, oh, this is Witchfinder General. But that didn't help the fact that this Vincent Price kind of character came in, disrupted the current leadership of the keep, and made the bailiff and his 5 guys his personal strong arm squad there. And so now the players have this conflict with the bailiff, and the bailiff was based on the Tyrion character from Dragon Slayer. I even made his token like that, and they hated this. I mean, it's so much fun when your players hate one of the villains and can't get the upper hand on him until a couple of sessions go by. It was so much fun. I'm sorry, you may have to edit this whole thing out because nobody wants to hear about somebody else's campaign. But it was all.
It is good. It defeats my case though because
well, no. I mean, I had to do a lot of work as the DM to keep all these factions.
That's actually a good
going.
point. Like that was on you, like to do all that. I can relate to that.
I didn't know about these tools. I later found out when I was doing this research. Oh, faction versus faction. I don't have to run this crap. I just need to find somebody off the street, kind of explain the situation, and have them come up with this stuff.
And hand it to them. Yeah,
hand it to them. Yeah, this is the stuff the OSR is doing. Yeah.
Going back to 5e, it was exhausting. The entire game requires you to come up with everything that faces these extraordinary powers. That's the entire experience of being a 5e dungeon master. And there's also the expectation of a story, and then kind of like pacing the story and trying to get everyone to feel like have their spotlight moment. And in the old school Central game, I didn't really do any of that. I sort of had moved to a model of like, hey, you're all on the same team, and that's what we're doing. Milan, the Hungarian D20 Society guy, he does Echoes from Fomalhaut.
Yep.
That was the main thing. That was actually kind of like the main tool that I had used for the Swords and Wizardry campaign. I used that map, and it didn't have anything filled in. And I came to appreciate, for example, I think it's supplement 5, maybe it's supplement 7, Carcosa. And you look at the hex map for Carcosa, and it just says like castle, 1 champion fighter, 200 red men, right? And it'll say things like that. And the procedures are the game. So you just play the game and use your apophenia. Like if you read Sword and Sorcery material, you feel that in. And I stopped preparing for sessions. I mean, and could you do this with BX? Yeah. You could. I mean, of course. But this is an entire different approach, to the game where everything is about what faces the world and fills that in, and less about the character. And then, okay, now I need to make a world that answers that character sheet.
I think, and this goes back to kind of the reason why we're having this chat is these lost ways, right? Player versus player, or external person that doesn't even have to have a lot of experience can be dropped in to help make these faction play decisions and take that burden off of you as a DM and come up with creativity.
In case someone doesn't know what you're talking about, kind of zoom out. What are you talking about there? Like, cause like if somebody's, you're describing patron stuff, right? Like exactly. How does that work?
Okay. Well, we did a couple sessions of Boot Hill, first edition Boot Hill. And again, I was starting to over prep. I was like, I need to hand this stuff off. And I recruited some people, and ultimately we didn't move the campaign forward. But one of the people I recruited was my wife. And she's like, well, I'll do it. I'll be one of your mayors, but I want to be in charge of the brothel, and I want to be in charge of this. And I'm like, okay, well, this is even better.
That actually sounds really fun. Actually. It sounds like.
Yeah. So I had recruited her. Ultimately, we didn't go forward with the Boot Hill thing because Boot Hill First Edition is just very heavy lift on the gunfighting. And it was hard to drum up enough interest to keep that going. But the point is, you don't have to have anybody that's got any role-playing experience. Doesn't need to know the rules, nothing. They just need to be able to think like a human being, right?
You were making this Wild West campaign, in case somebody doesn't know what Boot Hill is, right?
Right.
And you're like, you think you're going to make a role-playing game, and you're going to make a setting, and then you're going to have a party and characters, and you're going to meet and everything. And instead of doing that, what you're telling me is you took like key aspects of this Wild West role-playing game campaign. You're like the matron of the... Wait, what did you say she ran? She
was the mayor of one of the cities, and
mayor of the city.
But she also wanted to run the brothel business.
She wanted to run the brothel. I'm just going to pick one of those. Like, okay, so you got like the brothel in town where this Wild West thing is going to happen, and instead of you having any of that, you said, you know what, honey, you ask your wife, hey, you don't need to know. Like, can you just tell me what you would do?
Right.
You just make decisions. Tell me what you would do. And then, and then you could just do that with everything.
Oh, and she would, I made another character, the sheriff, and she was like, well, and I had a backstory for the sheriff, and she's like, well, I don't like that guy. And so the first thing she did is like send him off on some mission to get him killed. Yeah.
No.
I was like, damn, I did.
I suppose I don't want to call it a downside, but you do, with this approach, you would have to be prepared to just have it fly off the wheels. You're not in control. You are not in control if you're...
Exactly.
Okay. Give me one more example of this type of play.
Well, the Braunstein stuff.
You've done. Tell me, give me one more story of this.
Oh, yeah. And this is more recent, right? And it is a Stein that I ran. That's a player versus player example. I guess for faction play, I don't have another good example for you.
Give me that player versus player example. Tell me what happened.
So player versus player, right? Running any Stein, the whole idea of a Stein is that you set up players that have some conflicting goals and some cooperating goals. And you put them in a pressure cooker situation where they can't escape from it, and they have sometimes a MacGuffin, some kinds of ticking time bomb. And in the case of the second one that I ran, it was a ticking time bomb kind of situation, right? It's Hitler and his minions in the bunker as World War II is crashing in on Berlin, right? So,
okay.
And you got Goering, it's kind of counterfactual, but like Goering is there and like he's in charge of getting the planes in. And meanwhile, the Soviets are maybe shutting down airfields where certain size aircraft can land. And some people want him to go up to Berchtesgaden, and some people want him to head off to where Dönitz had his headquarters. And so you got conflicting people in the bunker trying to get Hitler to go, they're playing tug of war with Hitler. So It got crazy. It got crazy. And of course, the guy that played Hitler had his own agenda.
Somebody played Hitler.
Yeah, somebody played Hitler.
That's hilarious.
We're going to play this thing again in January. So if you want to participate, cool. It was gonzo too, right? I had there was stuff about, the UFOs and there was potential to find a secret lab with a giant.
Great. It was like Pulp too.
Yeah, it was Pulp too.
World War II thing. That's great.
Yeah, it was nuts. Eventually Hitler started shooting, right? So he could have it. Yeah, people tried to shoot him, and they did the little gunplay thing. It was a blast, right? Very non-politically correct, right? We're not gonna make light of World War II, but then again, it was so much fun.
No, totally. Hilarious. It sounds hilarious.
Mel Brooks would have been quite at home, right? He would have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. This was the producer's version.
Oh wow. Okay, so I got a couple last questions. Just a couple more. So one, I want to go back to Dragons Beyond.
Sure.
So you make this clone, and this is just so fascinating to me. And I think it's really salient. You pointed to something. I've read Dragons Beyond, but I think I'm still kind of, for one thing, it matters less until you actually play something or employ something. So that's kind of a bit of a trouble. So I look at Dragons Beyond, I'm like, okay, this is original Dungeons. This is like from the Three Little Brown Books and stuff. But I think you found something there that like I'm emphasizing that like original Dungeons and Dragons is this form of D&D that is world facing, where you can hand it over to the participants. You could have these situations where you're like, you're the Baron or you're the Werewolf King or whatever.
Yeah.
And you just give them the most important element on the board up front. And people can't help but be excited and start doing like what your wife did, where she's like, all right, I'm just going to kill that guy. And like, it's just chaos and entertainment and drama from the get-go when you take that approach. But it's true. So like original Dungeons and Dragons has this section, which I think I've come to say is the most important rule in the game. I don't know if I just do this to be irritating or what, but like people love to talk about, should the fighting man have, should it be like an attack per HD, or should it be per monster, or should it get a bonus to an attack, or blah, 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 blah. Like this is just a never ending cycle. To me, I think that's the least interesting rule in the game. I like this solving the quadratic wizard problem is the least important D&D design problem ever. The most important rule in original D&D to me is the one I mentioned, where it's like a certain number of peasants, if a hex is cleared of monsters, will produce a certain amount of gold coins annually.
Right.
And because it interlocks out from there. Now, all of a sudden, you have every single thing implied about clearing the wilderness, the monsters, the monster lairs, the treasure math, the baronies. Like every single thing is interlocking on this map game, an adventure game. So, but it's missing this thing you're describing. And I think, didn't you say that is that a separate supplement? That was a work you did, is that the patron aspect of it, which is not, if I recall correctly, is not in book 3.
It is not in the LBB published in 74, right? That was the reason why I wanted to play these 73 rules. Was Arneson kept saying in interviews, and I think he even mentions it in First Fantasy campaign, the fact that there was stuff that got left out of LBB, of these LBBs as published, right? He sent material to Gygax, and some of it didn't make it in, right? It was different. And what you see in these 73 rule sets, both the Arneson v. Gygax lawsuit one and the Beyond This Point v. Dragons one, is that barony stuff, but it goes a step further, right? Especially the Beyond This Point v. Dragons one. It talks about wizards being able to belong to fellowships or guilds or strike out on their own. It talks about, clerics having their own order. It talks about fighting men working for other fighting men. And then the rules still imply it, right? If you look at all those monster descriptions where it's like, bandits have a potential to have a hero, bandits have a potential to have a superhero, these guys have the potential.
And that interlocks with Chainmail there, like all of that. Wow.
But it interlocks with patron play too, right? Nobody spells it out. That's why there's a page in Dragons Beyond that I put in there where it's like, hey, if you're a fighting man and you don't want to work as a retainer inside somebody's castle, here are some other options, right? You might be recruited by the bandits, or you might be recruited by the dervishes, or you might be recruited by the brigands. You can go work for those.
That's amazing. Like, look, I like the underworld maze. I like the underworld just as much as the next guy. I enjoy it. I do feel like the OSR, this is another criticism, it's like made for level 1, and it's about this dungeon, and it's sort of hard. There is no game for the other aspects. You get into X, and then you have some things for the wilderness. I found that those numbers did not work as well as OD&D, frankly. But there's definitely what you're describing, and it makes me think of this connection with M.A.R. Barker. It's starting to sound like city-state. It's because you have this world, essentially. You have like every reason for every component in the world to do something. One of my favorite rules in original Dungeons and Dragons, and I think it's like, what if you actually treated this seriously? What if this is a rule to a game? I believe it says something like, if you want a rumor, you have to spend either 50 to 200 gold pieces, which is a tremendous amount for the economy. Basically, you just take over the town for the night in outrageous debauchery. Right. Or you talk to the innkeeper and you can give 5 gold pieces. It's something like that. Like, what if that were a fictional fixture of how that tells you about the economy, how the world works. That tells me this is like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, where everyone has their hand out and their mouth closed. And so this tells me about the world. And what you just described interlocks into this world, where you have these competing groups, thieves and dervishes and all these different things and stuff. You may never see a dungeon. You'd have a whole world, you'd have a whole game. And OSR games struggle to do that.
They do.
You have to just make it up, essentially. You have to just like kind of make it up.
Well, that's the problem with the BX thing, right? B and X, that's great. But what about C, the BECMI companion rules, where it had all the domains play stuff like domain events, running tournaments, how to actually get domain income, those kind of things. There's actually a lot that all these OSR people have forgotten too from the BECMI line. They could have just done BXC and been a lot better off.
That's true too. Yeah, but instead of BX based OSR, BEC based. But and I think what people would say, they'd be like, well, it just sounds. First of all, I'm not a wargamer, and second of all, this sounds immensely complicated, and my players aren't that into it. Fair enough. Okay. If I'm trying to pitch this, hey, a real world, like a real secondary world, like City State or Tony Bath's Hyboria or Greyhawk or Blackmore, like it's like a world. Okay, look, if you don't want that, the other aspect of this that I think makes it compelling is this creates a game that can be for anyone. You can have the game that is for your wife that wants to run a brothel, and that's fascinating, and it's hard for that not to be interesting for just anyone.
Right.
Whereas, and I like dungeon crawling. I like it. But if that's it, then it's just not going to be for a lot of people. But if this could simulate like that Braunstein, I think if that you have that mindset that this, like you said, from Strategos, that like this could simulate anything, then you could simulate things that are fascinating to just about anyone. And you could do it in an hour or 30 minutes or 5 hours or over. You could do this in so many different ways, and the conventions of play and the social technology of play can conform to the things simulated and the participants. And so I think the promise is there that Dungeons and Dragons has all of these things.
Oh, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You said you know a lot about 1E. I guess I'm going to take one crack at 1E, and I'm going to ask you one more question, if it's okay.
Sure, ask me one question, and then I would like to mention one more plug for 0E based on the investments section. So
that I'd love that too. Actually, no, let's do that first. Yeah, please do. Please. So, how many times have people tried to make supplements and tried to do this investment thing? Basically, I want to buy something in the world. I want to buy a tavern. Yeah, Tell me about that.
Yeah, so 1E says that you can make certain investments in the world. And it just gives you a list of suggestions. If you go to Arneson's First Fantasy campaign, which was that Judges Guild publication from 1979, 1980, he goes into excruciating detail on how you can create ships, do logging, do hunting, do trapping, run a tourist business, basically. The rules are already there. And it's not like you can't find this PDF. So if you wanted that stuff, great. Same thing for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. They do a really great job in their heroic edition. And the same thing Macros does with Axe, right? Adventure Conquer King system. They've got the ability to do investments and other reasons why you would create like a cathedral or have to clean out a blighted area or something that the evil clerics set up. So you could do a Catan kind of game, right? D&D doesn't have to be limited to hack and slash. It could also turn into an economic game. I don't know that a lot of people would be interested in that, but it's quite possible to do that.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but if I recall correctly, the investment section of Book 3 interlocks with other rules. So, because it's in the barony section as a subsection, and I think it says that what it does is when you buy an investment, it's got like fisheries, roads, animal husbandry. When you buy that, it brings more people. I think that's what it does. And so, like, again, it goes back to this like load-bearing, central mechanism of the feudal fantasy medieval feudal simulator where people and land matter, and that creates gold and stuff, and this is why castles matter and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, monsters matter and factions matter and everything else. Whereas if you don't have this, so let's say you take the Matt Colville approach to having a domain, because he created that book back in whenever it was, 2019 or whatever. It's completely disconnected from the game. And what I found when I was running 5e is players will just forget what they have. They'll have loads of stuff and they're like, oh, I forgot I had that. Because it's not really, and they won't care. There'll be nothing at stake and they won't remember it. And
BECMI are out two other things, right? Like, so the Gazetteers for the Known World or Mystara or whatever you want to call it. The one from Minrithag Guilds and Darrokin, they have your land trade and your sea trade. So if you want to set up a trading game, the rules are, all this stuff is available as PDFs. The rules are out there. It's just that it would be nice to have it in one centrally referenced place with a consistent design philosophy, right?
Yeah, so, and a good reason to get Dragons Beyond. So you can, like, and certainly consulting the Hadiths, as my friend calls it, worth doing no matter what, but also it's helpful to have somebody who's done it for you like yourself. So, Dragons Beyond to that end. And I suppose I'm going to take a crack at 1E and then I'll ask one final question.
Let's go.
I'm definitely not trying to make this about like OD&D above and beyond 1E as well. Like, I get that people are doing these living worlds and ambitious play that's multimodal and everything with 1E. But my impression is, you said you know a lot about 1E. I've read it and I've played it. And I've ran it one time, but I'm not that familiar with it. Especially something so ambitious and so thick, I'd have a lot more learning to do. The impression I got was that people who are doing these living worlds like Trolopulus came to the conclusion that ultimately they had to go back to Chainmail anyway. Like, if I recall correctly, Trolopulus used Chainmail, that he came to the conclusion that, and they looked at swords and spells and stuff like that, that there are some things that are also not answered in AD&D. And I don't know if that's true, and if that is true, like, why? Like, is it because they started to shift toward a product that was serving role-playing game people? Or I don't know, but the impression I'm getting is that if you want this kind of ambitious game, ultimately you're going to have to go back and look at the basis of the game, no matter what. Like, you're not going to get out of that.
Yeah, swords and spells I'll reserve for a different tirade. But
I imagine, yeah.
But I believe that and this is, if I had an infinite amount of time, what I would love to do is take Chainmail, or maybe even take the Old Lords of game that Alchemic Raker came up with, which is a revision of Chainmail, basically a re-edit of Chainmail. Old Lords of Wonder and Ruin, I think, is what it is.
Wonder and Ruin, yeah.
Wonder and Ruin. Take a greatly organized Chainmail like that. You could find every one of those rules in AD&D. AD&D has morale rules. AD&D has failure states, like, different, depending on the degree of the morale failure is what the consequences of that failure are. There are a few a few things that are missing, like mercenaries, but the loyalty stuff is there too. I really think, and they definitely got the troop classes, they've got the naval warfare stuff, although I think OD&D's naval warfare is superior to 1E, but they've got a better aerial rule section in 1E than they do in OD&D. So I think the short answer is you could get there with 1E. It's just that it's all over the flipping place, right? If you want to fire your catapult that's on your galley, now you've got to flip back to the pages that have to deal with stronghold construction, where they buried the trebuchet and the catapults and ballista ranges and damage stuff. It's just all over the place instead of consolidated. It's there. It's just not easy. It's not easily referenceable at the table. You can't run a siege with it the way it's written. It just will not work for you. You would spend
interesting. Yeah,
you'd be constantly flipping back and forth.
By no means am I telling people not to to play winning. But I am telling people who are like do conventional play with old school, never mind moderns, old school Dungeons and Dragons, that if you hand people the most important elements in the world and don't run it yourself, it makes the game about 10 times more interesting, and it's actually easier. And this is a original Dungeons and Dragons is oriented towards achieving that.
I think Dundermoose once said it best, right? You got to hold the world with an open hand, and have the trust that your players are going to do the world justice, right? They're going to be fair to each other, and they're going to be fair to the world and fair to your game.
Yeah. And if they're not, it'll be funny.
Yeah.
So there's that. I recently saw my world burn, and I make fun of that archdruid to this day. He knows what I'm talking about. But he's allowed to do that. He's allowed to win D&D, I guess. Okay, so speaking of winning D&D, the last question I have, the future. What do you think's going to... The Matryoshka doll of design we've observed, like first of all, the failing of what I've heard called fifth generation design, which is like, all right, now that 5e is dead, now what do we do? And they've already got that figured out, and the traditional play continues, and that's already dying. And then you have people that are experimenting now, and it's not just the Bro SR people. There's this, I don't know if you saw it, but there's the Mothership over under game. There's I saw another one. I see people resurrecting play by mail.
Oh yeah.
Like so like there's the chaos of the collapse of D&D is like a rich soil for design, and people are doing things. What do you think's going to happen? Like, do you think that they're just going to reassert control and organized play is just going to look like it always has with RPGA and Adventures League and everything else? And do you think it's never going to change and we're just weird? Or do you think it, what do you think D&D is going to look like when we're gone?
What's it going to look like? I think these ideas, I think especially if you look at Alarms and Excursions and the fanzines for D&D, that came out. I think that period from 1968 to, I always placed the cutoff at December in 1981, but you could go, there were so many games that came in the early 80s after 81. I think, let's just call the arbitrary date like 88. So from 68 to 88, that 20-year period, all the arguments that we've been having now, all these play styles, somebody somewhere was experimenting with it.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
it'll be totally. Perpetual reinvention, regrowth, rebooting existing material. I mean, you see it, like you mentioned, play-by-post. We've done play-by-post chainmails and play-by-post other adventures and things like that. That's already going on in Discord. Some people have talked. One person asked me for my address so that we could do like an actual typed up, putting the physical mail.
Wow.
Play-by-post. We're going to do a play-by-post using the mail system. There is a separate hobby. Like, haven't you seen like these murder mystery things where somebody will like mail you stuff and you're supposed to figure out clues and stuff?
It's called something. It's called augmented reality, right?
Right.
Do I have that right?
Yeah, something like that. People will be reinventing this stuff. It's more like there are also these epistolatory games, right, where you're still doing like a solo adventure, but it's like letters and diary entries and things like that, where you're going through and you're doing your own solo play through this thing so that it can have different paths. But it's possible that players will take something like that and do that play-by-post, like literally with the mail or with Discord. All these play styles are going to be continuing long after we're gone, and people will be arguing about the same things. They'll be arguing raw versus, rule zero.
Oh no, never mind. I don't want to be on this planet. Never mind. I don't. It's gonna take. Oh man,
it's law versus chaos. It's
that's
always
fair. Yeah, law versus chaos. Yeah, the eternal cosmic struggle. That's true. Well, that's a compelling idea. It's a terrible. I don't want that. that future, but that's hard to argue with.
Well, let me put a finer gloss on it then. Okay, there's an interview with Kurt Vonnegut by I think it's a BBC interview, where he's asked, right, about his idea of the eternal recurrence, right, of being reincarnated but having to live over his exact same life at the same, going through the exact same sequence, and he's sitting there in a pleasant studio with the interview, and he's like, well, this isn't such a bad moment to have to relive over and over and over, right? So maybe these arguments, raw versus zero, rule zero, won't be so bad after we do them 300,000 or 400,000 times, right?
All right. Well, Rod, what else are you working on right now? I mean, obviously, don't pass up what you're putting on your blog, first of all. But what kind of projects are you working on?
Oh gosh, well, this is the one that's close by, so I'll just pull this up. This is the Move Out and Draw Fire. It's basically Vietnam.
You're doing that?
Rules, yeah.
See, I didn't get that impression. I didn't know, but I was like, man, that is so cool. And you even you made it like a manual cover. That's so fun.
Yeah, this is an actual FM. It's got the same font kind of style as an FM. It's going to take Army manual. I got a picture in here, but I've got numerous. Anyway, the short answer is this is consuming me, and probably I'll get 99% finished, and then I'll flip to something else because that's the way my creative brain works, unfortunately. So.
Well, it looks very cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, all right, Rod. Well, thanks a lot for joining me and chatting with me.
Ross, it's been a pleasure, man. Let's do this again, not for the cameras or anything. Let's just keep the conversation going.
Yeah.